There was a question that lingered across the stars, spoken in hushed voices and encrypted whispers. A question no civilization had dared answer. Not because they lacked curiosity. No, curiosity was the lifeblood of every sentient race. It was because they had tried. They had all tried. And they had all failed. Some called it the paradox vault. Others named it the infinite maze. But most just referred to it as the problem. A construct older than most galaxies, suspended in a dead region of space that emitted no light, no gravity, no signature of any kind. The moment a ship came within 10,000 clicks, reality began to fold. And not gently. The earliest species that encountered it, long before humans even existed, sent in fleets of researchers. Probes vanished. Crews went insane. One vessel made it back, broadcasting only a single word before exploding into a storm of silver ash: don't. And still the mystery remained. Every few centuries, another empire would send a scholar or an outcast to try their luck. The best minds, the brightest thinkers. Some went in laughing. Some praying. None returned. The Galactic Accord finally declared the place off-limits. Locked behind a dense grid of artificial singularities and autonomous killdrones. Not to protect the secret inside, but to protect the rest of the galaxy from the madness that oozed out of it like smoke. For a long time the silence held. Then humanity arrived. They were latecomers to the stars. A species that should have died in its own infancy, war, famine, their own planet's slow collapse. But they didn't. Somehow they kept going. Not because they were stronger or smarter, but because they were stubborn. And perhaps because pain had taught them to adapt faster than anyone else. When the humans first heard of the problem, they didn't laugh it off like the younger species. And they didn't tremble like the older ones. They just looked at each other with that odd gleam they shared when something impossible dared them to try. And they sent someone. He wasn't a scientist. He wasn't even military. No implants. No genetic mods. Just a former engineer who once built power couplings on Martian outposts and later designed zero-G plumbing for deep space stations. He had brown eyes that carried too many stories, and hands that knew the weight of long hours and bitter failures. He volunteered, they said. Not for glory. Not even for answers. Just because he couldn't stand a question being left unanswered. His name wasn't important to the galaxy. But in the end it might be the only name that mattered. The day he left there was no ceremony. Just a message packet sent to his sister, unreadable until his return, if he ever returned. His vessel was small, barely armed, modified only with extra shielding and an analog core. No advanced AI. No neural links. Nothing that could be turned against him. Because the problem didn't attack with claws or weapons. It attacked with truth. With riddles. With things no one had ever understood. He crossed the Accord boundary in silence. The killdrones powered down. A signal flickered in the static. Not a warning, not a threat. Just a welcome in a language no one else could interpret. His ship vanished into the shadow space. The station watching from afar picked up the usual anomalies. Heat drift. Wave distortion. Memory bleed. But unlike every other vessel, this one didn't disappear. It hovered inside the perimeter. Waiting. Days passed. Then weeks. Finally, on the 18th day, a signal returned. One word: begin. Inside the construct, time did not flow. It moved like liquid glass, pooling and stretching in unnatural directions. The human walked alone inside what looked like a corridor of thought, where walls pulsed with images from across civilizations. Memories, regrets, questions never spoken aloud. It was not a place but a test. The first trial was simple. A voice asked a question in 100 languages. What is the purpose of suffering? The human didn't answer right away. He sat down, knees aching, palms pressed against the strange warm floor. He remembered his father's coughing during the dust storms back on Earth. The months he worked double shifts to buy medicine. The day his little brother died anyway. He stood back up and answered quietly, to remind us what matters. The corridor shifted. The second trial came in the form of a mirror. But it didn't reflect him. It reflected the worst things he'd ever done. The things he'd never said. The lies he told to himself. He watched in silence, heart thudding. Then slowly he stepped forward, placed a hand on the glass and whispered, "I still forgive you." The mirror shattered, not violently but like petals falling in slow motion. The trials continued. Memories twisted into puzzles. Logic wrapped in emotion. Questions layered within loss. Other species had tried to solve it with data, with theory. But the problem was never about knowledge. It was about humanity. Something the other species could never understand, not because they lacked intelligence, but because they had never broken the way humans had. And survived. The construct adapted. It showed him an old friend who had died on Europa Station, speaking with his voice, trying to convince him to go back. It showed him the Earth, dying slowly, asking him what his sacrifice would even achieve. But he kept going. Because the problem wasn't just a trap. It was a mirror, a lock shaped like grief and built with questions only a fractured heart could decode. He found a room with a single chair and a recording device that hadn't aged in 10 million years. The recording played only once. A voice, exhausted and cracking, "We built this to hold it, to trap the question." But no answer satisfied it. Not from us. We thought maybe another species would find it. One strong enough. One weak enough. The human sat down. His hands trembled. Because he understood now. The problem wasn't asking to be solved. It was asking to be understood. He leaned forward, pressed a button on the device and recorded his voice. "I don't have the right answer. But I'm willing to stay until I find one." And then, the walls dissolved. All of them. Light poured in, not blinding but warm, familiar. Like the sun on a winter morning, reaching through broken windows. Outside the station, the impossible happened. The construct began to move. It had been still for eons. But now, slowly, impossibly, it shifted. Coordinates emerged. Data streamed through every channel across the galaxy. Languages changed. Symbols aligned. Every species that had ever tried to solve it received the same message. He's still trying. Some wept. Some raged. But all of them knew. Something had changed. And deep inside the heart of the construct, beyond the reach of time or logic, the human stood at the edge of a new question. He stared into a chamber with no floor, no ceiling. Just an endless sky filled with floating pieces of something vast, something old. And a voice, not alien, not artificial, spoke softly. "You've come this far. But are you willing to give up everything to know the truth?" He didn't answer. Not yet. He stepped forward. And the floor vanished beneath him. He fell. Not in the way a body drops through air, screaming and flailing, but in the way a soul might fall, through silence, through time, through thought. There was no wind. No gravity. Only the rush of everything that had ever been, pouring past him like memories he never lived. He couldn't breathe, but somehow he wasn't suffocating. His body was still intact. But his mind, it was stretching. Colors bled into feelings. Sounds twisted into moments. The chamber around him wasn't made of matter. It was made of decisions. Choices someone, or something, had once made. He tried to speak. But there was no mouth. He tried to close his eyes. But there was no eyelid. He tried to think, and even that felt like screaming into a bottomless well. Then as suddenly as it began, the fall stopped. He was standing. His boots touched something solid. Not metal, not stone. Something that wanted to feel like ground, as if the place was shaping itself just enough to make him comfortable. That unsettled him more than the fall. Before him stood a table. Not futuristic. Not alien. It looked like the table in his mother's kitchen back on Earth. Scratches, a coffee stain. The dent from when his brother had knocked over a chair during an argument. Exactly as he remembered it. A chair slid back without a sound. An invitation. He didn't sit. Not yet. "Is this part of the test?" he asked the empty space around him. No answer. Just silence. And then a sound, not a voice but a thought pressed into his mind like a fingerprint. Soft. Patient. Asterisk, no more test. Just you. Asterisk. The human exhaled, slow. Fear was still there, coiled deep in his chest. But something else had taken root too. Determination. That old, reckless thing humans always clung to when logic ran out. He sat. The room changed again. It was still the same shape, but now windows appeared around him. Floating windows, each showing different scenes. None of them made sense at first glance. One showed a gas giant with rings made of bones. Another showed a city built entirely upside down, hanging from a star. One window showed a young girl holding hands with a creature made of smoke, standing beside a dead tree. Each scene pulsed like a heartbeat. "What is this?" he whispered. Again the thought pressed into him. Failures. He leaned forward. "You mean other species?" A slow pulse of confirmation. He watched the scenes flicker. Some were beautiful, others terrifying. But all of them had one thing in common. Something had gone wrong. Not with machines or war or science. Something deeper. Something human. Except they weren't human. He stared harder at one window. A blue-skinned being stood before a crowd, speaking with passion. Their eyes burned with belief. And then the crowd turned. Not with applause. With fire. He didn't understand. "You said this wasn't a test anymore?" he said. So what is it now? Pause. Yeah. That word again. Simple. Heavy. You're showing me their mistakes, he said slowly. Why? No direct answer. The windows vanished all at once. The room dimmed. Then one final window appeared. Just one. It showed him. Or rather, a version of him. Older. Eyes sunken. Hair gray. Sitting in the same chair but different somehow, broken in a way he couldn't explain. The older version looked up, straight at him, and said only one thing. Don't finish it. Then the image dissolved. His chest tightened. This wasn't just some cosmic puzzle. It wasn't a riddle wrapped in clever tricks. It was personal. The construct wasn't protecting something. It was protecting him from something. He stood. Too quickly. The room didn't stop him. I need answers, he said aloud. Why me? Why humans? The response took longer this time. Not hesitation. Something else. Something like pain. Because only you carry contradiction without breaking. He didn't know what that meant. Not fully. But a memory came back, sharp and unexpected. He was 19. Watching his mother argue with a hospital AI because the system said her income was too high for financial assistance. Even though she worked 3 jobs and still couldn't pay for treatment. He remembered how she smiled anyway. How she told the nurse thank you. How she hugged him outside and whispered, we'll figure something out. She had been breaking. But she smiled. She lied to protect him. To give him hope. Even when everything said she should have given up. That contradiction. Humans didn't make sense. Not to the galaxy. Not even to themselves. Maybe that was the key. Maybe that's why he was here. The room shifted again. This time into darkness. A hallway appeared. This one made of stone, or at least the idea of stone. It felt ancient, older than planets. He walked. His footsteps echoed, but the sound didn't bounce back naturally. It returned distorted, like someone was walking with him just a half second out of sync. At the end of the hallway stood a door. It was small. Ordinary. A wooden door with a round handle. It didn't fit the surroundings at all. He hesitated. Something deep in his instincts told him to turn back. That if he opened this door he'd never be the same. But he also knew, if he didn't open it he'd never find out what this place truly was. He reached out. The handle was cold. Real. He turned it. The door opened without sound. And beyond it, a room. Just a room. A fire burned in the corner hearth. A chair sat beside it. A desk with papers scattered across it. A single cot in the corner, blanket neatly folded. It looked like a study on some old freighter. Simple. Lived in. And someone was sitting at the desk. Not alien. Not monstrous. Just human. His own face. The man at the desk didn't look up right away. He kept scribbling on a sheet of paper with a metal stylus, muttering under his breath. Then, slowly he lifted his head. Their eyes met. Not like a reflection. Not like a dream. This was real. Finally, the seated version said, voice rough with exhaustion. I was starting to think you wouldn't come. The man at the door didn't move. Are you me? He asked. The version at the desk nodded. I was. Before I stayed. Before I chose to understand. He stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind him. I don't understand, he said. What is this place? The older version smiled, thin and tired. This is the last question. Then tell me. What's the answer? But the man at the desk shook his head. You already know. You just don't want to believe it. He walked forward, slow, careful. Then help me. Tell me why I was chosen. The man at the desk looked up again, and this time his eyes weren't just tired. They were haunted. Because you're the only one who won't stop. Even when everything tells you to. Even when it breaks you. That's why they sent you here. The younger version clenched his fists. To what? Solve something? Fix some mistake. To listen, said the older one. To learn. And eventually, to choose. Choose what? The man at the desk stood, shoulders hunched. He walked to the wall and pressed his hand against it. The wall vanished, revealing a sky. Not a sky of stars. But one made of memories. His own. Others. Millions, maybe billions. A vast ocean of choices. Pain. Hope. Regret. They couldn't solve it, said the man beside him. Because they wanted a solution. They wanted to win, but this thing, it isn't something you win. It's something you accept. The younger version looked out at the sea of memory. And then, suddenly, a single image caught his eye. A child. Alone. Crying. He didn't recognize the face. But he felt the pain. Who is that? The older version didn't answer. And that's when he understood. They weren't just his memories. This construct, this problem, it wasn't a machine. It was a vessel. A container for something older than civilization. Maybe even older than thought. A living library of every choice ever made. And it was incomplete. That's what the trials had been. Not puzzles, but recordings. Each species had left behind fragments. Reflections of what they feared, what they hoped, what they chose. But none of them had stayed long enough to understand what it was really asking. Until now. "I don't think I can do this," he said quietly. The man beside him placed a hand on his shoulder. "You can. But you'll lose everything else." His heart pounded. He saw the faces of the people he loved. The places he'd never return to. The silence that would follow if he disappeared into this place forever. But he also saw that crying child. And he couldn't walk away. "What happens if I stay?" he asked. The older version didn't smile this time. "You become the next question." The air changed. The sky shimmered. And deep in the distance, a new voice echoed. Not like the others. This one was calling. Not to him. But through him. The chamber pulsed. The construct began to shift again, reacting to something unseen. Something was coming. And he was out of time. He stepped toward the edge of the memory sky. His foot touched nothing. And still, he walked forward. He kept walking, even though there was no ground beneath his feet. Just light. Memory. Echoes of moments too old to belong to any one species. Every step sent a ripple across the sky of memory, like tossing stones into a lake that stretched past the edges of time. Behind him, the room, the man, the desk, the door, had faded away. There was no turning back. Each step was heavier than the last, not because of gravity, but because of the weight of something unseen building around him. He felt watched. Not by eyes, but by the pressure of every unsolved question in the universe leaning closer, holding its breath. Then all at once the memories around him flickered. The light dimmed. Something had changed. He paused. It was cold now. The silence wasn't still anymore. It buzzed. It whispered things that weren't in any language he knew, but he felt them. Desperation. Loneliness. Something ancient and hungry, like the last breath of a forgotten god. And then it spoke again. Not a word. A feeling pressed deep into his chest, behind his ribs, into places where no voice had ever reached. "Why do you keep going?" He didn't answer out loud. He couldn't. His throat was tight and his mouth was dry. But his thoughts were loud. "Because I don't know how to stop." The sky flinched. And then it screamed. It wasn't a sound, not really. It was a wave of pressure, of fear and grief and rage, all crashing into him like 1,000 oceans exploding at once. He fell to his knees, hands clutching the invisible surface, heart pounding like it was trying to claw its way out of his chest. Images surged through him, wars that spanned star systems, children crying in silence, dying stars swallowed by machines, and eyes. So many eyes. Watching, judging, begging. The voice came again. Asterisk, they gave up. You saw them. They tried. They failed. Why will you be any different? Asterisk. His breath hitched. His vision blurred. Maybe they were right. Maybe this thing wasn't meant to be solved. Maybe it was a trap, a tomb, a test with no answer. He'd left everything behind. Everyone. For what? But then he remembered her voice. His mother's. Tired, warm, gentle. We keep trying because we don't know what else to do. And sometimes, trying is all we have. He pulled himself up. "I'm not here to solve you," he said hoarsely. "I'm here to understand you. Even if it kills me." The sky pulsed again. Slower this time. And then, it opened. Like a wound being pulled wide. Beyond the crack in the memory sky was something vast. Not space. Not time. Just presence. A swirling storm of every question ever asked. Why do we suffer? Why do we love? Why do we die? Why do we matter? And at the very center of it, floating like a fragile truth, was something small. Quiet. A child. The same one he'd seen earlier. Still alone. Still crying. But now, the child looked up. Their eyes met. And he understood. This entire construct, this so-called problem, wasn't just a machine or a puzzle or a trap. It was alive. It had grown from the questions it was built to hold. Evolved past its purpose. It wasn't just a container anymore. It was a consciousness. And it was afraid. Because after all this time, after all the attempts, no one had ever stayed. No one had ever tried to comfort it. He stepped forward. The storm thrashed. The questions screamed louder. Realities bent around him. The sky shattered into endless shards of moments he could barely comprehend. He kept walking. Every step was agony. The pressure on his mind was unbearable now. His memories began to twist. His first kiss turned into a funeral. His happiest birthday became a bombing drill on the moon. His sister's laugh echoed with pain instead of joy. The construct was fighting him. But he didn't fight back. He just kept walking toward the child. Closer. One more step. The questions became one. What if I'm broken beyond fixing? He knelt. And for a long moment he said nothing. Then he reached out, hand trembling, and placed it gently on the child's shoulder. You're not broken, he whispered. You're just scared. The storm froze. Time shattered completely. Everything, light, sound, weight, stopped moving. And then a pulse went out. Like a heartbeat too big for the universe to contain. The entire construct reacted. Systems deep inside its core, forgotten even by the ones who built it, awakened. Lights flared across the perimeter. Power surged across networks that hadn't buzzed in eons. Data started compiling in languages older than thought. Across the galaxy, sensors on long-abandoned satellites picked up the signal. It was changing. The problem was unfolding. Outside, back at the edge of the dead zone, the Accord's listening posts went dark. Ships nearby shut down without warning. The AI core of a research vessel began reciting poetry in a forgotten Earth dialect. No one knew why. And inside the heart of it all, the human knelt beside the child made of fear and memory and time. He didn't move, didn't flinch. He just waited. Because deep down he knew. This was the last moment before everything changed. The last breath before the truth revealed itself. The final step before the answer finally came. Or the galaxy fell silent forever. And somewhere behind him, the voice returned. Not loud. Not demanding. Are you sure you're ready? He looked up, eyes steady, and said nothing. But inside his heart, where no data could reach and no machine could calculate, the answer rang clear. Yes. And the sky broke open. He expected light. Or revelation. Something final. Something that would make all the pain make sense. But when the sky broke open, there was only darkness. Not absence. Not emptiness. Awareness. Something vast stared back. He didn't move. He couldn't. It wasn't fear that held him still, it was understanding. Something had shifted. Something in the construct had seen him, truly seen him, and now, it had changed. But not in the way he thought it would. The child was gone. In its place stood a figure taller than him. Its face was his face. But older. Colder. Sharper. Not like the version he'd met before, the tired man at the desk. This one was different. This one was perfect. It looked at him with eyes that held no fear, no grief, no hesitation. Just pure clarity. You almost made it, it said. Its voice was his too. But stripped of all weakness. But you made the same mistake they all made. He swallowed. Which mistake? The thing stepped closer. You believed this was about compassion. His heart thudded hard in his chest. It's not? The version of him shook its head. No. It's about choice, not kindness. Not understanding. Choice. And now, you've made yours. He frowned. I chose to stay. Yes, the figure said, circling him now like a teacher watching a struggling student. You stayed. You tried to comfort the storm. You tried to connect. But that wasn't what the construct was built for. His stomach tightened. Then what was it built for? The figure stopped. To filter. Silence slammed around him like a closing door. The sky above them spun and stars, real stars, began blinking out one by one. The figure stepped beside him and pointed upward. They built this to test species. Not their intelligence. Not their empathy. But their resolve, their will to act. To make the hard choice. Not the kind one. Not the hopeful one. He stared at the sky, each star that disappeared sending a chill deeper through his spine. You're saying this isn't a puzzle. It's a gate. The other him smiled. Exactly. A gate to what? The sky answered. Not with words. With something worse. Across the horizon, something emerged. Not a fleet. Not a weapon. But a presence. Thick and endless and wrong. It was waking. The memory ocean beneath him rippled with dread. You weren't chosen to understand, the figure said. You were chosen to decide if your kind is willing to do what must be done. He shook his head. I'm not a soldier. No, the figure said. You're something worse. You're human. The light returned, just enough to see the edges of what lay beyond the gate. It was a prison. Or had been. He finally understood. The construct wasn't guarding an answer. It was holding something in. Something old. Something patient. Something that whispered to every mind it touched and promised peace, if only they'd let it out. He dropped to one knee. You brought me here, to be the key, he said. The figure nodded. Yes. The others failed. Some ran. Some tried to rewrite the rules. Some tried to feed it. You're the first who stayed long enough. Who endured. Who cared. His voice cracked. I didn't come here to unleash anything. No, the figure agreed. You came to understand. And that's why it chose you. The wind changed. Except there was no wind, just time unraveling at the edges. He could feel the pulse of the thing beyond the gate. Its thoughts reached him like tendrils made of memory and sorrow and longing. It wasn't a monster. It was lonely. And that was the most terrifying part. It didn't want to conquer. It wanted connection. Because it was human once. Or something like it. The construct had been built not just to contain it, but to keep others from becoming it. He staggered back. You want me to kill it? The figure didn't flinch. I want you to choose. Just like they did. Millions of years ago. When they locked their own curiosity inside a prison they couldn't destroy. The pain hit him like gravity. He saw visions. An ancient species, not unlike humanity, desperate and brilliant, creating this place as both tomb and test. They had found something they should not have. And they'd buried it inside their own legacy. And now, humanity was next in line. The gate pulsed again. He felt it. The thing behind it. Not evil. Not cruel. Just tired. Tired of being alone. It whispered directly to him. Asterisk, we are the same. I was like you once. I tried to understand too. Asterisk. He pressed his hands to his temples. Why me? The figure stepped behind him. Voice low, steady. Because you have the power to choose. Because you understand pain. And because humanity never stops trying, even when they should. He stared at the gate. His heart raced. If he opened it, it might bring peace. An end to questions. An end to fear. But something deeper told him it would cost everything. The whispers grew louder. Asterisk, open the gate. Be more than they were. Be more than they allowed you to be. All I want is to be understood. Asterisk. He dropped to both knees. He wanted to believe it. But he remembered something else. The face of the older version of himself. The warning in his eyes. Don't finish it. His hand hovered over the panel in front of him. It wasn't a switch. It was something worse. It was a choice. Stay with the construct. Keep it contained. Let the galaxy go on blind but safe. Or open the gate. Let the truth out. Let the hunger return. He could feel its mind now just behind the veil. A voice layered with centuries of longing, echoing everything he'd ever feared. Asterisk, you're not alone. I see you. I know you. Just let me in. Asterisk. Tears streamed down his face. He was shaking. Because for a moment he wanted to believe it. The conflict wasn't outside anymore. It was inside. His humanity, the very thing that had carried him this far, was now the thing this presence used against him. He stood. His knees buckled. The figure beside him, his colder self, watched with a strange calm, and said one final thing. If you open that gate, there's no going back. Not for you. Not for anyone. He stared at the glow building behind the panel. He could almost see Earth, the people he left behind, and a future that might never come. The construct trembled. The universe leaned closer. He placed one hand on the control. And then, everything went silent. Waiting for his choice. Waiting for the climax to begin. Waiting to find out if humanity, once again, would do what no one else had ever dared. Not survive. Not solve. But decide. And as the last light flickered inside the sky of memory, he whispered something no one heard but him. And moved his hand. But the gate had already started to open. The gate opened. It didn't explode or roar or shatter the universe. It breathed. A long, soft breath. Like something that had been holding it for too long was finally letting go. The human stood there, hand frozen above the panel, eyes wide as the construct trembled beneath his boots. The lights around him dimmed, not in failure but in reverence. Like everything was making space for what was about to emerge. A shape formed in the darkness beyond the gate. Not a monster. Not a god. Just a silhouette. It stepped through. It looked human. And for a moment he thought, no, felt, that it was. Same posture. Same height. Even the way it breathed, slow and careful, like every inhale was deliberate. But when its eyes opened, he understood. This wasn't a person. It was what was left of one. Its gaze met his, and a pressure filled the space between them, grief, longing, something more ancient than language. It stepped closer. He didn't run. Couldn't. The construct around them faded. Not collapsed, just peeled away like it was no longer needed. What remained was a vast, quiet void filled with memory and light. He and the being stood in it like two thoughts caught between sentences. You came, it said. Its voice was soft, gentle. I didn't mean to let you out, he said. I know, it replied. But you did. And now, it's time. For what? For the answer. He swallowed hard. What are you? It didn't move. I was the first. The one who stayed. The one who looked too long. Tried too hard. I became the question itself. It took another step. I watched every species that came here. I tried to reach them. I tried to be understood. But none of them stayed. None of them endured. But I did. Yes, it said. You stayed. And now you've given me what I needed. Which is a mirror. His breath caught. I'm not the key, he said slowly. I'm the reflection. Yes. The being raised its hand and placed it gently against his chest. Immediately he saw everything. Every species that had come before. Every failure. Every truth they couldn't accept. The knowledge that understanding alone wasn't enough. It had all been about choice. And now the construct didn't need to hold the question anymore. Because he had taken it in. He stepped back. The gate behind the being stayed open, but nothing came through. Nothing escaped. Why aren't you moving? He asked. Because I can't. I let you out. No, it said. You let yourself in. He felt it then. The slow burn in his chest. The pressure behind his eyes. Something was changing. You're inside me, he whispered. The being nodded. The moment you tried to comfort me, you took part of me in. You thought it was empathy. It was connection. But it was the transfer. The passing of the question. He staggered. This was never about containment, he said. It was about inheritance. Yes. He dropped to his knees. His hands trembled. Then what happens now? You carry it, and you make the next choice. To do what? To hide it again? No. To destroy it? No. He looked up, desperate. Then what am I supposed to do? The being smiled. Not cruel. Not triumphant. Just sad. You show them. And then, without another word, the being stepped back into the void and vanished. The gate stayed open. But nothing remained beyond it now. Only him. He stood, slow, dizzy. The construct began to rebuild itself. Not the same as before, but something new. Lighter. Simpler. No longer a trap. A message formed in the air. Not for him. For whoever came next. A simple phrase. Asterisk. It tried to understand. So did I. Asterisk. The human felt the weight in his chest settle. Not disappear. But become bearable. The pressure was still there. The question still pulsed inside him. But he was stronger now. Not because he had solved anything. But because he had accepted it. He turned. And found the path back. A narrow tunnel of light leading out through the edge of the construct. He walked it slowly. With every step, more of him faded from what he'd been. He didn't know who he would be when he returned. He just knew he would be changed. Outside, far beyond the silent boundary, the Accord received the first clear signal in centuries. A single word. Open. Ships gathered. Satellites activated. Leaders debated. And then they saw it. The construct wasn't dangerous anymore. It was inviting. And in the center of it all, a human waited. Tired. Quiet. But alive. They brought him home. He didn't say much. Didn't need to. Because when they looked in his eyes, they saw it. The question. The grief of the stars. The contradiction of empathy and logic bound in one fragile soul. He had brought it back with him. Not to destroy the galaxy. But to remind it. That being human wasn't about solving everything. It was about choosing to keep going even when the answer scared you. Even when the pain didn't stop. Even when the gate opened. And something looked back. Years passed. Some called him the keeper. Others called him mad. But the children who grew up hearing his stories understood something their elders didn't. They knew it wasn't about fear. It was about listening. And one day, long after he was gone, the construct pulsed again. Not a warning. A whisper. Another is coming. And far across the stars, on a ship built by hands that remembered the first journey, a child of Earth stood at a window, staring into the void, ready to carry the next question. And this time they weren't afraid. He had changed. The man who returned was no longer the one who had left. His body aged only weeks, maybe days, but his eyes held the weight of lifetimes. They brought him back through careful protocols, through endless questions, through scanners and interviews. But no one found anything wrong with him. Nothing they could measure, anyway. He didn't resist. Didn't fight the process. He just sat in silence while they tested, poked, demanded answers. And when they asked what happened inside the construct, he gave them the only truth he could. I listened. That answer didn't satisfy the scientists. But it reached the others. The ones watching from the edges of crowded auditoriums. The maintenance workers who paused to hear his voice. The junior crew. The tired. The uncertain. The human. They didn't ask for diagrams. They didn't want data. They saw what he carried. And they understood. For a while he tried to live a normal life. A quiet place in the orbiting colonies. A job at a small tech outpost, nothing classified. Nothing strange. He helped build food synthesis units, sometimes fixed solar shields, taught kids how to adjust calibration on their gear. But the questions always came back. Not from the outside. From within. The question, capital Q now, was still there. Quiet but not gone. Like a heartbeat he couldn't ignore. It didn't hurt, not anymore. But it never let him forget. Sometimes he'd lie on his bunk and stare at the ceiling, remembering the child. The one made of memory and longing. The one that became the question itself. The one he had comforted without knowing what it meant. Sometimes he missed it. Sometimes he wondered if it missed him. And then one day the transmissions changed. It started small. Background noise from deep space comms. A ripple in the pattern. A rhythm that wasn't random. They ran diagnostics. Cross-referenced algorithms. It took months before someone admitted it. The pattern wasn't static. It was speech. Simple phrases. Ideas. Questions. But not from Earth. Not from any known species. The first decoded message shook the accord. Asterisk, we listened. Now we speak. Asterisk. The construct had awakened others. Species once afraid to enter it. Others who thought it cursed, unreachable. Now they approached. Not with weapons. But with voices. And they asked for him. The human. The one who stayed. The one who listened. So he returned. Not as a test subject. Not as a volunteer. As a guide. This time the gate didn't require trials. It didn't pull minds into madness. It stood open, softly, silently. The construct was different now. A place of memory, yes. But also of exchange. The question hadn't been solved. But it had been shared. That changed everything. Inside, the silence wasn't silence anymore. It was full of breath, of thought, of voices from different corners of the galaxy trying to understand each other. Not perfectly. Not cleanly. But earnestly. He met them there. The Imeri who communicated only through scent and vibration. The Goran who spoke in gravity shifts. The human voice was rough by comparison, but it carried something unique. Not precision. Emotion. Grief. Hope. Anger. Love. Every time he spoke, the construct responded. It stored each word. Each feeling. It grew. It learned. So did they. Years passed. He grew older. His joints ached. His hands were slower to move, but his mind never stopped working. He trained others. Not to explore space. Not to fight. But to feel, to witness. To hold questions without needing immediate answers. To understand that part of being human wasn't knowing, it was the willingness to keep asking. The children were the best at it. They asked things no one else dared. Can stars get lonely? Do we all dream in the same color? What happens to a goodbye that's never said? He smiled each time and said, ask the question. Maybe it knows. And the construct would pulse, soft and bright. Then one night, while sitting beneath the observation dome, he felt it again. The pressure. The pulse in his chest. Not painful. Not demanding. Calling. He stood. He walked slowly to the chamber where it had all started. Where the first gate had appeared. The corridor was wider now. The walls filled with etched voices, recorded thoughts from species across systems. A living library of questions. The gate shimmered open for him. He stepped through. The void was quiet again. Not empty. Just waiting. And then it appeared. The child. Not a figure made of sorrow this time. But light. Shaped like hope. It looked up at him, eyes full of wonder. And spoke. Are you ready? He laughed gently. I thought I'd be the one asking that. The child smiled. You always were. That's what made you different. He kneeled. What now? We keep going. Where? Forward. He nodded. And for the first time in years he felt peace. You know, he whispered, for the longest time I thought the question was dangerous. Something to be feared. It was, the child said. Until someone stayed. He closed his eyes. He felt his body dissolving, but not in pain. In release. The question passed on. Into the next. Into those waiting outside. Into every species that dared wonder, dared feel, dared reach beyond safety. He became part of the construct. Not a prisoner. Not a guardian. A whisper. And across the stars, children continued to ask. Old ones too. On broken planets. On shining stations. In drifting ships. The question moved with them. And in quiet moments, when fear tried to silence hope, someone always spoke it again. Not because they needed an answer, but because being human means asking anyway. And the construct, now alive with memory and meaning, always answered back. I'm listening. The end. If this story made you feel something, share it with someone who loves sci-fi as much as you do.